I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if you can teach your children one thing when they're young, especially when they're young, it's to get out there and move their bodies and exercise, and ideally be out in the nature, but learn to enjoy just putting one foot in front of the other and ideally moving forward. The most simple exercise, play, sport they can be involved in is running as a child, and most children will want to run around anyway. So you kind of, I feel that you need to nurture that, because I feel it's so natural for a child to want to kind of play around and run around with their friends, that until they get to school, and then it's kind of maybe seen as a punishment, or maybe they're kind of like, it's seen as hard work because they're pushing themselves towards a cross country or a track and field or whatever, and it becomes maybe more competitive. But it was frightening for me last night to watch. I was watching a documentary about like a pop star in the UK called Lewis Capaldi, and I remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago somebody told me about him, and said that he had a funny Instagram, and so I looked at his Instagram. He had millions of followers, and he was extremely down to earth, extremely likable, and very, very funny. And so I thought, oh, okay, I'll listen to some of his music, and I think probably we'd all heard like his major tracks or his major songs, and then I kind of quickly researched him, whether he was writing his own songs. It's always interesting for me to listen to somebody who's writing their own music, and then you see that he's extremely talented, and I didn't really know his backstory. I just knew that he was extremely down to earth, and he'd come from a place in Scotland, and still sort of lived at home. And yesterday's documentary kind of talked through that, like that rise of, like, it's still been sort of playing the pubs and clubs and stuff like that around Scotland, and then he'd made a song, and had written a song and played it, and then sort of realised that this is going to take off, and then before he knew it, it was number one in the charts, incredibly famous, and had always been the fun time person, and has always been kind of class joker and stuff like that. So great set of friends, great family, but they'd always seen him as a playful individual, and all of a sudden this kind of like intensity that came from writing a couple of hit singles, putting together an album, and then signing with a record label. I don't know how it works, in what order, etc., but then of course the record label want you to make the next money maker, and then you're kind of in this money-making factory that is the music business now. And I can't even imagine what it's like to be that famous, to not even be able to leave your house. But for him, he started to realize that he had a twitch, and it was pretty horrific to watch, and I felt it was heartbreaking to watch, but he was kind of like had this problem that he was trying to manage, and he later found out that was Tourette's. At the same time, the record label and his manager is putting pressure on him to write something. Then he's writing with a team of writers in the UK, he's writing with his band, then he's flown to Los Angeles in the top of his probably crisis, where he'd have to come off stage, and then they're just trying to get something like put together, and that's essentially what happens to people on a smaller scale in work, in their own business, and I guess we've made this world now that is so comfortable, it's so convenient for us, that once you are tested, once there is a bit of pressure on you, and this is immense pressure. I mean, this kid is like selling out stadiums and stuff like that, so I cannot imagine what it's like to play in front of 50,000 night after night after night after night, and the energy involved, and the partying afterwards, and getting up the next day. But there was also part of me that had just sort of seen, because he was only born in 95, 96, so you got to see sort of how he grew up, and he was making videos. He was making kind of videos with a guitar in front of, and how he wrote songs, and he was kind of predicting the future, etc. And a really likable lad, but there was no exercise in his life. There was no healthy habit of just getting out there and taking care of his health, which we know, healthy body, healthy mind. He seemed to have spent his childhood with the guitar, playing music and stuff like that, and that's brilliant. I think, you know, whatever you're passionate about, you should go all in. But I think we see it no matter whether it's in sport, whether it's in music, whether it's in any field now. If you want something sustainable over a long period of time, you know, and from a business point of view, if he wants to be kind of making track after track after track, it's got to be some level of exercise to take care of your body. There was a mind-blowing scene where, you know, he's in the back of a limo and somebody's giving him a vitamin B12 tablet and a vitamin A tablet, as if, you know, the night before he's been drinking, and a couple of McDonald's that day, and then thinking that a tablet, a vitamin A tablet and a vitamin B12 tablet is going to smooth everything out. And it was just, and as the kind of videos went on, he's getting bigger and bigger and bigger to a point where it's going to be harder. And, you know, there's a scene there where he might be doing yoga, or he might be kind of talking about yoga, he's doing yoga. There's no sign of any regular healthy routine in his schedule where he would get up and take care of his body. And I think no matter what you want to do and what you want to achieve in life, like the top business people in the world who are able to sustain it over a long period of time, not the people who just, you know, create an app or create a piece of software and sell it and become multi-billionaires. I'm not talking about that person. I'm talking about anybody who wants to be top of their field for a sustained amount of time, needs to look after their health. And, you know, and the easiest, most simple thing you can possibly do is just get a pair of running shoes and just go out there, put one foot in front of the other, go for a walk, ideally turn that into, as we've talked about, like 10 times 1 minute running. Go out there in the park, find a nice park, somewhere that you like to run, somewhere that inspires you. Try to do this first thing in the morning so that you cannot avoid it in your schedule. And make it habit as early in your life as possible, because of course you're going to go through problem years in your school years. Of course you're going to go through some change for a boy or girl, you know, as the hormones are all over the show and you're 14, 15, 16, 18, and, you know, of course at some point you're going to find alcohol and parties and everything else that comes with it. Of course you're going to find that. But if you've got something that kind of harnesses everything that you're about, and if you've made progress, your physique, you're in shape, you're taking care of that. And I'm not sort of preaching here that it should be running. If you love playing tennis, if you love playing football with your mates and that's organised regularly, then great, no risk. You know, go out and do whatever you can. Even if it's cycling, you're gonna need to go out and you need to plan. Okay, I've got to get on the bike. You know, what's the weather doing, etc. With a pair of running shoes, you can find a treadmill. You can go out, whatever the weather. You can run, whether it's kind of minus 40 or whether it's plus 40 degrees. You can go out there and run. It's so simple. It's so accessible that there's no reason. I saw Liam Gallagher running. He really likes running. You know, Ronnie O'Sullivan, mega into his running. At different points in his life, that's been. I mean, think the perfect example, Ronnie O'Sullivan, like the great, potentially the greatest sportsman to have ever lived in the niche sport that's not all over the world in snooker. If he was in any other sport, whether golf, tennis, football, whatever, and he would have been as good as he has for so long, literally 3 decades or more, then, you know, he'd be celebrated as the greatest ever. And running was always in his schedule from a really early age. And whenever he's gone off running never really went off the rails. Like, he probably had a couple of years when things were slightly wrong, but, you know, nothing wrong for somebody who's basically a child prodigy, and then, you know, parents and then, you know, in jail at different times, and you know, who wouldn't go off the rails to some extent. So what Ronnie's done with kind of like smoking a bit of marijuana and doing a bit of coke, etc., that's not really going off the rails. Like, for, you know, it's kind of it's always brought up, but I always think nobody's talking that he's been amazing for 3 decades, and his father got him into running from a really early age, because when you go to the pro-ams, You can read this in his book. When you go to the Pro-Ams, you've got to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning. And if you get to the final and you're an amateur, you might need to have been there 15 hours. That kind of might not finish until midnight. So his father was smart enough to know that you need stamina even in snooker. So if you need that in snooker, which was before, not so long ago, only 30, 40 years ago, not so long ago, you'd see people with a pint of beer and smoking during the match. And Ronnie's father was able to see that if you can put running into that, then that's going to be sustainable. You're going to be better at your game, and you're going to be able to sustain it for a longer period of time. Then why isn't that everywhere? Why isn't it? It's got to be some kind of health routine to look after the vessel. You only get one chance. So yeah, if you have kids and you can get them into one thing, they're naturally going to have all the options thrown at them at school. But if you can get them into one thing and get a routine going in running or in some form of exercise, I think they have a huge advantage.